This is Metro Week. Our top story, the race in Congressional District 2. We'll hear from each of the candidates facing off in a rematch of the 2012 election. Then we review the race with our Journalists Roundtable.
I'm Andrea Kelly. Southern Arizona's Congressional District 2 includes much of Tucson and all of Cochise County. Voter registration is almost evenly divided among people registered to vote as Democrats, Republicans, and no party, and the district has often been called moderate as a result. Democratic Congressman Ron Barber is the incumbent, seeking his second full term in office. He was elected in mid-2012 after Gabrielle Giffords resigned, and he then beat Republican Martha McSally in the contest for a full 2-year term. The two are again up against one another, with each saying economic issues top their priority list. Earlier this week, Arizona Public Media aired a live forum with the candidates. We now bring you excerpts from that hour-long discussion of policy and political position with the event's moderator, Christopher Conover.
You both have called for better border security to stop human trafficking and drug smuggling and the violence that both of those issues bring. What your positions don't seem to address is the U.S. demand for drugs and cheap labor. So what would you do about that demand? And you have 1 minute.
So addressing the root cause of the issue for those that are coming over here, aside from the cartels, is that our legal immigration system and our visa system is totally broken. I mean, we have people in border communities like Douglas who want to be able to come over and work and then go back home at the end of the day or at the end of the season, and there's no easy way for them to do that. I met with a University of Arizona professor 2 nights ago who's been teaching in 25 years, giving out PhDs in a science and technology field, and he said there's only been 5 U.S. citizens who've gotten those PhDs. Everybody else is a foreigner. So we train them here at the U of A and we send them back to compete against us in other countries. So we need to have an immigration system and a visa system that welcomes those who want to work, that helps our economic growth on all ends of the spectrum related to skills and trade. And we do that, then we address some of the root causes of why we are in the situation that we are right now. We keep wanting to have Band-Aids instead of actually addressing these root causes, and so that's what leadership will do.
Mr. Barber, same question.
You're absolutely right that there is a demand, otherwise there wouldn't be the delivery of both drugs and people to come to work. With paid under the counter. The immigration bill, the Border Security and Immigration Bill that passed the Senate on a bipartisan vote that was sponsored by Senators McCain and Flake, is one I can support. I'd like to see a different aspect on the border security piece. The Border Security Results Act that we passed out of our committee would be, I think, a better fit. But I would take that bill and run it to the floor of the House. The problem is that the leadership of the party that handpicked my opponent doesn't even want to bring it to the floor so it can be discussed. I believe we need a temporary worker program so that people can come here safely and legally and go home. I believe we need a DREAM Act so that young people who came here through no fault of their own can go to college or in the military. My opponent says absolutely not to that. We need to bring 11 million people out of the shadows so they can be paid legally above the ground and make sure we go through a significant background check to vet them before they go to any kind of legal status. That will make our budget better because people will be paying taxes. So that's what I support. My opponent, on the other hand, Chris, has called the McCain-Flake bill the Obamacare of immigration. That is mocking our 2 senior senators.
Mr. Barber, let me ask, what about the demand? What do we do to cut the demand for the cheap labor and the drugs?
Well, I think you've got to crack down on employers, because employers who hire illegally are breaking the law, just like the people who go to work for them. And I believe that we need to have more enforcement, more ICE agents going after people who are breaking the law. And the McCain-Flake bill would do just that. Again, my opponent says she won't support it, but I think it's a good path forward if only her leadership that picked her would bring it to the floor of the House. I believe it would pass with a strong bipartisan vote.
Ms. McSally, let me come to you and change topics again. We're going to go to Medicare now. Big piece of the budget. We talked earlier about the Ryan budget and what it would do regarding Medicare. That was your position, as we talked about, has been reported in 2012. But let's talk about it now, as you clarified earlier. How do you reduce Medicare spending?
So let me just first go back to the border because he's gone over his time multiple times. But there was a bipartisan bill that came up to the House right before they went on recess related to the border. And so when push comes to shove, Mr. Barber talks a good game about the border, but when Nancy Pelosi tells him to line up, he said, "Yes, ma'am," and he voted against it. And this is what's wrong with Washington, D.C. People who say one thing while they're here, but they vote for something else when their party tells them to line up. Now, when coming to Medicare, I've never supported Medicare voucher system. And I've also never supported robbing Medicare by $716 billion in order to pay for Obamacare. In this debate 2 years ago, you remember, when I called Mr. Barber on this, he doubled down on it and said, those aren't cuts to Medicare, those are overpayments to providers, supporting them wholeheartedly. He now knows he has a problem with seniors, and that's why he's on the attack. I support initiatives that bring the cost of health care down so that Medicare and health care is affordable for us and our country and our seniors. And I will do that when I get to Congress.
Mr. Barber, let me come to you on this. She just said you are going to cut Medicare. You doubled down on it. Can you defend that? And how do you reduce Medicare spending, yet keeping the system sustainable?
Well, the falsehood that my opponent just put out one more time, as she's been putting it out since she ran her ads from the beginning of this race, has to be dealt with. Independent fact-check organizations have looked at that charge and found it absolutely false, and yet she continues to repeat it over and over again. What she did support, though, was a $716 billion cut to Medicare benefits that was in the Paul Ryan budget she said she would vote for. She can't have it both ways. But as far as what we need to do to reduce Medicare costs, we do need to deal with fraud and abuse. We have millions of dollars, billions of dollars going out the door every single day because providers are billing fraudulently. We have to crack down on them, as we did in Florida not too long ago, where we brought several indictments against providers who were billing $500 million in that case fraudulently. So that's one way to do it. But we also need to make sure that we bend the curve of healthcare costs. And that's what I believe is going on right now. If you look at the data, clearly healthcare costs are coming down. That's where we need to go, because they will ruin this country if we don't break the curve and bring it down.
Let's stay on healthcare, but a little different topic within healthcare. A key issue in healthcare is veterans and the shortage of resources, including physicians for veterans. Because Congress supplies resources by way of appropriation, are these issues that are your responsibility, and what would you do to make sure that the VA medical system has more resources? Mr. Barber, you get to answer this one first. Well,
we have actually taken action on that, I'm pleased to say, and now we need to monitor the implementation of the Veterans Reform Act that was passed not unanimously, close to unanimously by the House, and was a conference bill from the Senate. We have done that. We've given it to the President. He signed it. We have a new Secretary of VA, a guy with a lot of experience in managing large organizations. We need to change the culture of the VA to make it more receptive and responsive to our veterans. Look, my father was a veteran of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. If he were alive today, he would be as outraged as anybody, and I certainly am too, that what we discovered in the Phoenix VA system, which was absolute corruption, where people who should have been serving our veterans actually were hiding them on a paper waiting list so they could get bonuses. We've dealt with that in the bill that we talked about. We've also given $10 billion to the VA system to contract outside of the system so that veterans who live in rural areas that I represent will be able to get access to medical care and behavioral health care in their communities. That's what we're doing. It's not just talk, it's action.
Ms. McSally, same question to you regarding veterans health care. What can we do?
So for those who raise their right hand to serve, like I did, and 85,000 others in our community, we have a covenant with them that they're going to put their lives on the line to protect us, and we're going to make sure we take care of them. And what has happened at the VA is absolute dereliction of duty at the national level. Now, like many people, I get my care from the Southern Arizona VA health system, and when you get in there, you get great care from the providers there. But it's cumbersome and challenging, and the system is one that is allowing senior executives to be benefiting while veterans are struggling. Mr. Barber was serving in Congress for 3 years while this was happening on his watch. And he was at a speech on Memorial Day saying he's known there's been systemic problems at the VA for 6 years. Bystanders are ones people who complain about problems and know about them, but leaders are people who actually get things done. So we've got to make sure we have more veterans in Congress to fight for our veterans. We've got less than 20%. And so I'm going to go to Congress and I'm going to make sure that the veterans get the care that we promised and the care they deserve.
Ms. McSally, let's stay with you. Again, changing topics as we begin to wind this up. You were recently endorsed by the NRA, received an A rating from them. What, if any, limit should there be on gun ownership?
Look, there's no secret, Christopher, that I'm a Second Amendment supporter. I've shot the 30 millimeter in combat. And we can all agree that we want to minimize and we want to make sure that gun violence obviously is addressed in our communities. And we have different ways of talking about that. But the way that this has happened in this campaign has just been disgraceful. There were ads that were run by your allies that were considered vile and nasty by the Arizona Republic. And we repeatedly asked for you to stand up against them. And Mr. Barber, you wouldn't do it. Day after day, you wouldn't do it. They finally took the ad down because it was so horrendous. And you have an opportunity now tonight to denounce that ad and apologize. Do you believe that that ad was wrong, Ron?
When my time is up, I'll talk. When my time comes, I'll respond.
No, please respond now.
When my time is
I will
up.
give you my time.
Mr. Barber, since we have 3 seconds left on the clock, let me turn the question to you. What do you think of that ad?
Well, first
and
of
where do
all,
you stand on ownership of guns and limits and things like that?
I really want to be really clear with this question because it's very important to me as a survivor of a mass shooting, as someone who believes in the Second Amendment, supports it. And what happened to you, Martha, what you said happened to you was horrific. It should happen to no woman. I've got 2 daughters. I've got 3 granddaughters.
So
I want to make sure.
wrong.
Let me finish. Okay. I want to make sure that they're protected. I want to make sure that you're protected. Every woman is protected. That ad was not run by me, and I'm not going to talk about an ad that I didn't sponsor. But when you talk about allies, the ad was run by someone who is highly regarded in this community and across the country for her work to prevent gun violence, and that's Gabby Giffords. But that aside, what my opponent has said is that she now accepts the notion that we should have misdemeanor stalkers prohibited from having a gun. The problem with her position is that she still refuses to say we should expand background checks. 40% of the guns purchased in this country are purchased outside of the background check system. My opponent says she wouldn't expand it. I believe we must.
Mr. Barber, thank you. We're wrapping this up here. If Congress continues to be unable to act or unwilling to act, especially on things like immigration, should President Obama use his executive power? And you have 1 minute for this, Mr. Barber.
I believe that there's been way too much use, not just by this president, but by presidents going back decades, way too much accumulation of authority and power, taking it away, and honestly, Congress allowing it to happen, that we've chipped away at the check and balance system that this country was founded on. Congress has an absolute responsibility to respond to the immigration crisis in our country, the border security crisis. Every crisis that we face, Congress has to have their hands on it and be active involved with it. I do not believe the president should act alone. He should come to Congress, and Congress should step up to its responsibilities. John Boehner needs to bring the McCain-Flake bill to the floor so we can vote on it. It would pass in a heartbeat if we brought it to the floor. That's how it should be done, in what we call regular order, where the Congress has its hands on any important issue like this and the decisions that have to be made.
Ms. McSally, same question about presidential executive order usage.
People are very frustrated with what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. It is so dysfunctional, and the president and both parties are to blame. I totally disagree with the president moving forward on executive order and things that are clearly Congress's responsibility. Look, Congress is failing to address these issues, and the president is failing to lead. But you're in Congress, Ron, and you've been there for almost 3 years. And people are very frustrated with the dysfunction going on there. Leaders are people that are going to actually go there and make things happen. Instead of sitting back and complaining what the leadership's going to do, actually influence what the leadership's going to do. Make things happen, get things done, do the right thing, and serve the people of Southern Arizona as a servant leader. That's what we need right now. Everybody, all 435 get to be decided whether they should be hired and fired again. We need to send people to Congress that are actually going to get things done.
Thank you so much. And we have reached the end of time for our questions. We now go to closing statements, which are 90 seconds. Ms. McSally, you have the first closing statement and 90 seconds.
Thank you. Well, Washington is broken. We can all agree on that. And we change Washington by changing who we send to Washington. And I would ask those who are viewing tonight to tune out the slick, lying attack ads and take a fresh look at your options here. I'm asking you to take a fresh look at me, my background, my experience, and what I've done to make a difference. And take a hard look at Mr. Barber's record. Are you better off than you were 3 years ago? For most people, the answer is no. It's time for a change. We talked about issues tonight, but character matters. And even those groups or outside groups, all you needed to do was say, I thought they were wrong. But silence is consent. The biggest question I get on the campaign trail is not just about issues, but they say, you know, you sound like you want to get things done, but how do I know you're not going to go to DC and become like the rest of them and actually buckle to the pressure? And a lot of candidates say, well, I promise I won't do that. But I've shown that with my life. When I was deployed on my first of 6 combat tours to the Middle East, and 5 to the Middle East and 1 to Afghanistan, I walked by the duty desk and I saw the photo of a young enlisted woman wearing Muslim garb. And I said, I don't walk by a problem. I started to ask questions to try and figure out how to change this. For 6 years, I fought on behalf of them. They then ordered me over to Saudi myself, told me to sit in the backseat of the car, put the burqa on, and they were going to take me up on charges.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Join me next for Arizona Week as I sit down with the 2 lesser-known candidates for Arizona governor.
We're within striking distance of actually winning the governor's seat.
I don't have anyone to one up. I just have the public to provide services for and to protect. That's the governor's first duty.
We're back with our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me this week, Christopher Conover, my colleague at Arizona Public Media, Dan Shearer of the Green Valley News, and Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel. We'll stick with CD2. Dylan, when you watched the forum this week, did you see anything that was different or notable with the candidates?
I don't think anybody watched this debate expecting a clash of the oratorical titans. It was really just a skirmish of the talking points that we've heard, over and over again for the past few months. There were a few moments of some tension between the candidates. They don't really seem to like each other all that much, but I don't think there was much that was new.
And them not agreeing or not liking each other is in fact not new. No, we do know that. Now, you noticed something about an unemployment figure that was used in the forum?
Right out of the gate, Martha McSally was talking about how our economy is not in such good shape, and I think we all know that, but she said that the unemployment rate is 9.2% here, and the latest figures that we've seen from the Bureau of Labor Statistics show that Tucson, in the metro area, has a 6.6% unemployment rate, and Arizona as a whole is at 7.3%. I asked her campaign spokesperson where she got that number, and it's from a census release that came out a while ago, and it's not quite apparent how old that number is. Our unemployment here in Arizona has been under 9% for about, since the end of 2010.
Now, you were here watching the forum as it was happening, and you were gathered with some of the other members of the press who did follow-up interviews with the candidates afterwards. Did you hear anything different in those follow-ups that the public did not hear during the forum?
The same talking points. I mean, they both got them pretty well polished, and if you try and press them on anything, they're going to go right back to that.
We're hearing 2 years of the same things.
Yes.
So you also noted when we were talking a little bit about the body language or the way the 2 candidates were acting. What was your observation there?
Well, I don't think anyone would ever expect Ron Barber to be an incredibly motivating speaker. He's a pretty quiet guy, but he was, very calm and collected during the debate. And Martha McSally seemed a little bit tense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that she was trying to prove a point. I think she was trying to come off with presence, and it came off a little bit forced. I think for your next forum, Buzz, what you're probably going to want to do is put a big cage fight thing here in the studio, because really that's what it was. It was tit for tat all night long, and I think in the hour there was maybe 5 to 8 minutes of substance there. Otherwise, like Dylan was saying, it was pretty much just a regurgitation of the talking points. And no, I didn't say that. I said this, or I said that, but I meant this. And so it wasn't disappointing, because it's always interesting to see them interact with each other, but frankly it was more entertaining than informative.
And sitting in the room with them, other than our studio crew being the only one in here, you could definitely feel the tension between them. Obviously, their opponents, they've seen each other plenty for the last 2 years. And while they were cordial, they certainly weren't both heading out for pizza together after the forum. There's a lot of tension there between them.
Dan, in Green Valley, that's a big voting block in CD2, but sometimes we see that the issues that resonate there are different than in Metro Tucson or Cochise County. So what issues are really being played up in the campaign there?
Well, I would say number one, what they want is probably what everybody else wants, and that is somebody who can go to Washington and actually get something done. But here we're only in control of our little corner of the world, and I don't think one person can possibly go to Washington and make a difference, even though both of them sound like they want to go do that. And Ron Barber's only been there, two and a half years, and certainly can't make a dent. It's a lot more difficult, and you realize how little power there is unless you're part of the kind of the power structure. And so we want to see something get done. Obviously, Medicare and Social Security are big issues with us too. For people in Green Valley, it's what's going to happen to those in the next 5 years. The people who should be concerned about that are people like me, who in 15 or 20 years, I'm going to need to know what's going on with that. So we know the systems are in trouble, but they're not talking about the hard decisions that are going to need to be made to fix them. That was disappointing.
I was going to ask about that. Definitely there was vagueness, lack of clarity on Tuesday night with that. Have you heard any more specifics about Medicare and Social Security in those Green Valley forums?
Not really, and I think my question is, are they reluctant to put out details because they don't have them or because they're afraid that they're going to be twisted? And we saw from the Tuesday night forum that a lot of things are being twisted. And so people want to know what's going to happen in the future or where this candidate stands, and we're just not hearing that. And again, disappointing.
You tried to ask a question, Christopher, about to get them to kind of clarify their positions on Medicare, and again, it was just they clarified a couple of things, but we're still pretty vague on what they would actually vote for.
Exactly. There were very few specifics in that, and it was more for both of them trying to explain away or clarify things they have said in the past that the other campaign has latched on to. And that was really what a lot of this forum was trying to explain what they've said previously. We saw that on a couple of different topics.
Let's stick with those a little bit. On one of those, it was Ron Barber's response to something about maintaining the A-10 at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. What did he say? How did he clarify his position there?
The McSally campaign has accused him repeatedly of saying that the A-10 was safe and there was nothing to worry about. This obviously is not current, it's a past statement. And he said he was talking in a much broader picture, that Davis-Monthan and the A-10 in a larger picture were safe, but that from year to year, this fight over funding for the A-10 is going to have to happen. He then came back after McSally, same thing basically on the Ryan budget, quoting her saying 2 years ago she would support Paul Ryan's budget, and that has cuts to Medicare and things like that in it. And she said, no, that's not exactly what I said. I was given an option of 3 Republican budgets, and I said, well, that's the best of the 3 of them, so if those were my only options, I would support that one. And again, we heard a lot of that in the debate, the two of them trying to clarify or deflect criticism that the other campaign had given them on various statements.
And really what they're deflecting are things that have been twisted, because he made that A-10 comment a year ago, and then of course, like she pointed out, she was looking at 3 budgets, none of which she was really excited about, but okay, if I have to pick one, it's the Ryan budget, and then his campaign says, oh, she must support absolutely everything that's in it, and she doesn't.
Dan, last week we heard Fernanda Echavarri speaking on this program about how Democrats and Republicans have totally different takes on whether immigration is actually an issue this election cycle. Are we hearing any other things that are kind of different priorities in the parties, especially in this race?
Down from where I am, the real question is the security of the border, and U of A put out a study about 2 weeks ago where they were talking about the checkpoints, and it made the point yet again that the Border Patrol is awful at collecting data. It's always inaccurate, and they're the first ones to admit it. So this report came out and just offered suggestions for the Border Patrol to come up with accurate data, because unless we know the metrics, how can we solve the problem? We really don't even know what the problem is. And Ron Barber in August did introduce an amendment to some legislation that says the Border Patrol has 6 months to come up with reliable numbers so we can start addressing the problem. So we're talking about securing the border, but we really don't even know what the problem is.
We asked them that question that Dan really just kind of alluded to. What is a secure border? It's a question we've all asked of candidates this year and of previous years. And we asked them to be specific. Give us some metrics. And Barber talked about that bill, but he didn't give a specific this number of apprehensions or some sort of metric. And the same with McSally. There were no actual hard numbers. When this happens, then it will be secure. It's still very much a loose thing for both of these candidates, and frankly all candidates. They're not different than any of the other candidates, be it for Congress, the governor, or anything else. Even
the Senate bill, the Senate immigration bill, had check with people who live on the border to find out when the border is secure. It didn't have actual notable, measurable. It just,
exactly.
That's who we figured out with.
And McSally brought that up, that that's who we need to check with. But again, nobody is giving very hard, solid numbers, if you will.
That's something I pressed both candidates on after the debate, and neither one of them could come up with anything that we should count, nothing that we should measure, other than to just talk with the people who live there and talk with the Border Patrol agents who are doing that job, but not about, here's what we should count, here's what success would look like. We don't really know what a secure border would be in anyone's opinion.
And I just finished a 6-week Border Patrol Citizens Academy, and again, it's very controlled and you see what they want you to see. But I'll tell you one thing, I came away with it with the impression that you cannot secure the border at the border. It's absolutely impossible. Just drive along that border, and the one word that keeps coming to mind is terrain. It absolutely, you cannot cover it all. It is like a sieve. Ron Barber said during the forum, 100% containment in the high-risk areas, and he'll take 90% in the other areas. I think that's very reasonable, and it's probably the closest we're going to come to solid numbers.
How do you even know when you're there, though, right?
That's a great
You
question.
Prove a negative if something slips by. If illegal immigrants or drug smugglers, and you don't even know that they're there, how do you know what your percentage is?
Proving that 10%. Right. So I noted that we heard McSally mention that she supports a stronger guest worker program, or visas for temporary workers who do intend and then can return home after working here. And Ron Barber talked about cracking down on the employers who hire people who are here illegally or working without the right permits. So those were kind of we actually got to those specifics from them. Anything else new on immigration that any of you heard? Dan?
Well, that's I came away with the idea that this is the topic that they don't want to look weak on, but that they're afraid to put out specifics because they're going to offend somebody. And this is really one of the big issues. And it was brought up Tuesday that we had a year ago this so-called gang of 8 senators who were willing to compromise and put forward something that was really quite doable. They used diplomacy, they compromised, they came up with a pretty good plan, and then it went nowhere in the House. And I think that, and Ron Barber mentioned that, Martha McSally said she would not have supported this. Well, that may be as close to something good that we all can live with as we're going to get. And so it was disappointing, and I think we're still feeling the reverberation of that a year later.
Christopher, is all of this lack of clarity, this not very specific responses, is that a sign that both candidates are really trying to stay in the middle of this really highly competitive district?
This is a tough district because of the way the registration breaks down. It leans Republican, but barely, and you have almost equal numbers of, therefore, Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And it really, if you stray too far to one side or the other, you're going to lose that middle, those independents, which are very important. So a candidate really has to be very careful navigating this. People have accused McSally over the last 2 years of moving more towards the middle and getting rid of her Republican roots, if you will. And then she went after Barber about always voting Democratic. That she said only 20% of the time did he not vote with his Democratic colleagues, again, trying to paint him as out of touch with that middle of the road. So they're both trying to paint the other as extreme left or right and trying to paint themselves as middle bipartisan.
On that note, we've got about a minute left. We saw on Tuesday night some of the discussion about an ad that was run by Americans for Responsible Solutions, a political action committee run by Gabrielle Giffords, and McSally tried to get Barber to rebut a gun control ad in there. Were you, and he didn't really do that. Were you expecting a more firm response from him?
His answer was, well, I didn't run the ad. I'm not going to comment on an ad that was run by an outside group. Interestingly enough, 2 days later, another ad came out from the same group, this time featuring Giffords, talking about Ron Barber and how great a person he is, and it didn't go after McSally. It never mentioned McSally. It was a much softer ad, if you will.
Right. Sounds like you guys conclude that there's not that much notable from this week's debate. So thank you all for coming in, giving us a summary. That's a wrap for this week. The entire hour-long forum with the candidates is on our website if you missed it or if you want to see it again, along with stories that air on NPR 89.1. Next week, we'll hear from the candidates in Congressional District 3. And now on Arizona Week, interviews with 2 more candidates running for governor.